Hi, I'm Alyssa Newcomb, joined by Gillian Tans. Hey, Gillian, how are you today?
Very good. Thank you. Thanks for asking.
So I'm in New York City right now, and where are you joining us from?
Yeah, so I'm actually located in Amsterdam. That's where I live, and also that's where we have our headquarters of Booking.com.
Nice, one of my favorite destinations to visit. And I know I speak for a lot of people when I say I'm really excited for the day when I can travel again and travel again safely. And I know the Booking CEO has said that recovery might take years, not quarters. Do you agree with that? And what do you think the first steps are to getting on the road to recovery?
Yeah, so I agree, right? It will be a long journey to get back to pre-COVID levels. I think the first thing that everybody's thinking about, including Booking.com, is safety. And I think it's very important that all the guidelines that our countries are still in the making, but also some countries have put out regarding travel is quite important for people to follow because it will stabilize the industry as well. I think before there's really a vaccine or an effective treatment, I think people won't feel completely comfortable, I think, to travel like they used to. So we'll see some adjustments. And I think if you think about what travelers will be looking for, I think it is around hygiene, right, and cleanliness of properties. It will be around policies. So they want flexible policies because of the uncertainty, right, and the many changes the whole time as to the procedures that countries have in place. It will sit, if you think about around prices, right? Effective prices and good value because of the uncertainty in the economic future. So travelers will look for different things as well that companies like us, but I think in the travel industry will need to think about. But I do think if you think about the farther future, I think even though we'll see change, I think travel will remain a very important part of people's lives. I think travel it has a very positive impact on the world, and maybe not today or tomorrow or things change, but eventually I think companies like Booking will think through how we can really keep assisting and helping people to experience the world.
Now, let's talk about some of the other hurdles to overcome in recovery. I mean, one of them is job losses. We've heard from some large hotel chains and even airlines that are either cutting employees or putting them on furlough. Are those jobs ever going to come back?
Yeah, so I think that there's many aspects that you see happening, right? But I think if you think about the biggest part is first, I think, is around safety and people feeling comfortable to travel. I think that's one of the biggest hurdles that are happening right now that companies need to think about. Secondly, it's the uncertainty. If you think about the economic uncertainty, the confidence that consumers have in spending money, right? I think that is something that Booking is used to, right? We've seen many situations where that is actually happening and where people might make different choices, right? In where they book or where they visit. But the most important one is uncertainty. I think uncertainty now and the uncertainty might flow, of course, into the future. And companies like Booking and others need to really think about how do we make sure we build the right tools and services for customers, but also for our partners to help them in the future, but also help them experience the world.
So do you think that business travel will come back before travel for the sake of leisure? Which one comes first?
Yeah, that's difficult to say, right? Which one comes first? I think what we see today is that you see the first one that comes back is local travel. And that is something that Booking sees very clearly, right? We see it already in certain markets. If you think about Greater China, we see it in South Korea, for instance. We see it in Vietnam, but also in places like Germany. So you see that people take shorter trips. and local trips. And if you think about the share of Booking.com's business, it used to be, I think it was around 45% was domestic or local, and now that's already at 70%. So that also shows that people are booking these local trips. So that's a change. What you see, another change you see is book windows. So people either see certainly very short term, so now, or 2 months out. So that's also something that you see has changed. So these type of changes you do see happening. I think today, most of what you see is leisure. I think also because companies are still working from home a lot, right? So I think when people work from home, they're not going to take a trip while they can't even go to the office. So I think that will take maybe a bit more time before that starts to grow again.
So in the past, when I've had to change the date of a trip, I've called the airline and I've paid change fees that I think are up to about $200. Right now, airlines are waiving those fees, and I think that's making people feel a lot more comfortable. Do you think that's something that is here to stay moving forward?
Yeah, so that's of course difficult to say for the long term, because I think I think if you think about the industry, it evolves the whole time, right? If you think on the partner side, but also on the consumer side, I do think for now this flexibility is super important because there's so much uncertainty. So, and I think if you want to build that confidence with consumers and basically give them the confidence that it's okay to book, then flexibility, I think, is quite key at this moment. I think with Booking.com, we've always been a big fan of flexibility, right? If you think about our cancellation policies have always been quite flexible because it's actually pay when you stay, right? So I think, and we've seen that customers like that anyway, right? So hopefully that will increase, but of course we need to make sure that we help our partners with these policies as well.
Definitely. And you had mentioned earlier that we're seeing some very early recovery in parts of Asia as well as Germany. What are some things that we can look for or watch or possibly learn from as other parts of the world start to open up again to travel?
Yeah, I think if you think about China and what we've seen from China or parts in Asia, you do see that the recovery is not linear. So I think that's something that we thought about a lot, because you see countries are opening up, but some countries are putting restrictions back in place, right? So you see that the local travel element is something that you see picking up there as well. So people first stay a lot closer to home, and that's something that we are experiencing in these type of markets.
And that actually touches on my next question. So we are seeing a lot more domestic and local travel right now. I know personally in New York, a lot of my friends are booking cabins upstate in places where they can drive to safely. But historically, how closely intertwined are the hotel and aviation industries?
Yeah, I always say that if you think about the whole travel industry, it's one ecosystem, right? So in that sense, it's all tied together. If you think about a trip that somebody takes, there's always multiple players often that play a role, right? It could be an airline, an accommodation, but even if you rent a car or if you build a local tourist attraction, right? That's all tied to one experience. So I think in that sense, you see similar trends, right? Across the whole ecosystem and the whole industry. But like I said, you do see with accommodations, where we of course have the most data from, is that people indeed now prefer to take the car. Even though you do see, even in Europe, that slowly you see more flights start to operate. Before, flights were not even operating, so then it's difficult to see. So you do see a small uptick, right, in people taking flights. But of course, that will probably take a bit longer than people taking the car. And how fast that will progress, I also don't know.
And then just looking at my notes here, Booking.com, newly booked room nights were down 60% in March, 85% in April, and that's excluding cancellations. What can hotel owners, whether we're talking about a large chain like Marriott or a small bed and breakfast, what can they do right now to help themselves appeal to travelers and let them know, hey, we're safe, we're putting your safety first during the pandemic? How can they get those people back in rooms?
Yeah, so very good question. And I think, partners are very active to think through, okay, how can we make sure that we can capture a bit more back, right? Because they had serious losses because people couldn't travel. But I think the first part is transparency around hygiene, right? Transparency around rules around distancing, for instance. So that's something that is very important. And Booking is also helping accommodation partners with this. How can you make sure that that's visible? How can you make sure that consumers really feel comfortable visiting these places? The second part is really thinking through, like I said, the book windows are changing, right? It's either now or it's 2 months out. So also our partners and accommodations need to make sure that they have the right product on the shelves, right? For the customer that is starting to travel today. Prices, right? Customers have this uncertainty, so they are looking for good prices and good value. So that's something that they need to think about. And then I think if you, and reviews, you see that customers find reviews always extremely important when they make their choices, but now they're also really looking for recent reviews of customers that have stayed there. But yeah, there's lots of things that accommodation partners can do.
So as a traveler, if I were to go and stay somewhere, how important is it to the business of the hotel where I stay that I actually go online and I make a point to go out of my way and leave a review about my experience?
Yeah,
I know in the past I haven't necessarily been great about that, but is that one thing we can all do to help out business owners right now?
yeah, absolutely, because that's what consumers are looking at, and probably even more today because of this uncertainty and the safety that they're looking for. So it's really important, and it's also important to think through all of these destinations that have really suffered. And we see through research already with Booking.com from the past that 68% of customers find it really important that what they invest in their trip also stays in the local community.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that becomes even more important today since many of these destinations, many of these type of companies have big losses, right? So it's important to take these trips, right, when it's safe and possible, but to really support these communities, and not always to take the clear trip, right, or the clear visit to, but also go off the track, right, and support all of these local entrepreneurs.
Definitely. And on that note, last I checked on your site, you have more than 6.6 million private homes and apartments listed on Booking.com. These people I know are taking a very particular hit because this is income that they rely on to pay their bills, pay their mortgage. How are you working with these owners, and what have you heard from them about what the experience has been like for their small businesses during the pandemic?
Yeah. So a company like Booking.com, who has so many partners all over the world, is really working around the clock, right? Around the clock to help these travelers, but also around the clock to help these partners. And if you think about the results of Booking.com in March, we actually went below 100% because we had more cancellations than we actually had bookings. But that of course has an impact on Booking, but that also has an impact on all of these accommodation partners who were planning for these type of visitors, right? So Booking.com is very active in supporting, but also working around the clock to make sure we have the right tools and services, right, to help these parties. You do see that homes actually has a bit more increase than maybe hotels. Also, I think because of the units that have kitchens and you can really, self-isolate as such, right, in a home, which is sometimes different than a hotel, for instance.
That's interesting, and that actually makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
What does recovery look like, though, for these 6.6 million properties? Do you think overall they'll be the first to come back and hotels will come after that? Or do you see any differences between the ways that they rebound from the coronavirus?
Yeah, so that's very hard to say, I think, at this moment. Like I said, we do see that people might choose a home over a hotel, for instance. We do see that it's more domestic. We even see it in the wish list of travelers that we used to have. I think it was 35% of people that have wish lists with domestic destinations. That is now up to 55%. So you do see that in that sense, local travel is becoming much more popular, which indeed partners can really adapt themselves to. So that's an opportunity. But yeah, I think it's difficult to say how this will play out, right, in the future. I always say, like, when things like this happen, there will be innovation, right? There will be disruption. But Booking just needs to make sure we are here to support all of these partners and these travelers, and we're doing that as good as we can.
And can you talk to me about some of the ways you guys are supporting them? You're obviously a very large company. You have some major partners. And then you also have these smaller apartment listings on your site. How do you reach out to the big guys and also the local business owners?
Yeah, I think Booking, if you think about the model that Booking has already from the start, is that we build up a whole network to support our partners. We always found it very important to be very close to these partners, because if you're very close to these partners in all of these countries where we operate, you also understand really their challenges, their local challenges. And so we have, I think we have over 200 offices all over the world with people on the ground that support all of these partners. So that's the one thing that we do with people on the ground. And then more and more we've invested into tooling, because to make it easier and faster for accommodation partners to operate. So there's lots of, we've invested money in other types of tools that they need. But I think for Booking, it's always been, the partners have been an important part of our business, and also to make sure that they get more successful, that they understand, how do I now tap into all of this demand, right, of potential customers that are traveling from all over the world. And of course, this time has changed a little bit, but also here we can support them to see how they can tap in to get more of this domestic demand, for instance, which is something that is very active now.
And I don't know what it's like internationally, but looking within the U.S., I've noticed prices have varied wildly over the past few weeks. At one point, the price of getting a plane ticket from New York to, say, Arizona, where I grew up, was about the price of getting a cab to even just go to the airport. You look at the prices now, and we're talking maybe $500 for a ticket. In the past, that might have only cost $300, but a couple weeks ago cost $50. What do you think will happen to airline prices in the long term? And do you think there will be any major differences in the trends when we're talking about domestic travel versus international travel?
Yeah, that is difficult to say at this moment. Like I said, at this moment, they're still building up, right? So even airlines are not at their full capacity, I think. So that might create as well that if there's less airplanes, then these prices might change as well. I'm not an expert in the air industry, so I don't know exactly how that works. So I don't want to say something that I don't have all the knowledge around. But I think also airlines are looking more and more at this domestic opportunity, right? So they probably see similar trends. So but how that's going to evolve also with prices, that I think time will tell. And but that is something that is very difficult to say at this moment. That depends on how everybody really gets out of this pandemic, how soon I think there will be a treatment or a vaccine, right? I think there's so many things that are at this moment not completely clear, that it's very hard for me to say.
Definitely. And then finally, I want to ask you, we haven't really seen a pandemic on this scale since 1918, and obviously we all weren't hopping on, or our ancestors weren't hopping on planes back then to jet set around the world. Are there any lessons that you think the travel industry might learn from this moving forward? I mean, this is something that none of us really ever could have necessarily imagined or fully predicted. Where do we go from here?
Yeah, I think a big lesson that I see is sits really around sustainability, right? And a lesson that, and we've seen that customers are already much more conscious around sustainability, right? And but I think the pandemic showed us an important lesson on the impact our actions have really on the environment. So I think that more and more companies were seriously have to think about how to build a more sustainable future, right? And for us, that will be in travel, but there's many other industries as well. And I think that's probably what I see as a very important lesson coming out of this pandemic.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much, Gillian, for joining us today. And I'm Alyssa Newcomb.
Thank you. Okay, bye-bye.